How many it had cost in the amassing! What blood and sorrow! What good ships scuttled on the deep! What brave men walking the plank blindfold! What shot of cannon! What shame and lies and cruelty! Perhaps no man alive could tell. The fist that connected with Lord Thomas's chin did so with such heft that it knocked him backwards several steps. He turned his head to the side, spat out thick globules of claret-coloured spittle, and then wiped his mouth on the back of his forearm. Blood smeared across his arm and around his mouth. Some became matted into his thinly waxed moustache. Normally, he would have parried such an obvious blow, but the crewman who threw the fist had stomped on his foot right before he made the swing, and Lord Thomas had been caught off guard. The crewman would pay for that. Shaken off some dizziness, he brought his hands up again and advanced forward, bobbing and weaving with each step. The crewman had been laughing and raising his arms in response to the hearty cheers from the crowd surrounding them, but he returned to his aggressive fighting stance as Lord Thomas approached. They traded several blows, none landing with much force. The crewman attempted a feint in order to land a devious elbow, but Lord Thomas was expectant and chose to perform a feint of his own. Later, the crew would chatter about the huge haymaker the Lord had thrown, but those who were more skilled in the art of brawling preferred to talk about his footwork and how a dropped right shoulder had left his opponent confounded and hanging in the wind. For his deviousness and lack of martial etiquette, Lord Thomas had the foolish crewman awoken from being knocked out with a cold bucket of sea water, and at the suggestion of the captain he was then flogged until he passed out again. There was much talk of the day's events, and some toasting in the dining cabin that night. The ship's captain Howell sat at the head of the table. Lord Thomas sat to the captain's left, and his good lady wife accompanied him. It was her besmirched honour that had led to the earlier afternoon brawl. Opposite to them sat Mr. Wilkes, the master cartographer, and Mr. Hemmingsworth, the ship's surgeon. Lord Thomas was fixated on Hemmingsworth's peculiarly long nose, and wondered if it touched the inside of his goblet as he drank from it. Hemmingsworth noticed Thomas staring at him and put down his drinking vessel. "That's a fair shiner you have there, Lord Thomas. Want me to take a look at it?" Thomas scoffed and took a swift gulp of wine from his own cup before answering. "It's nothing to be concerned about, Mr. Hemmingsworth. I wear it with pride." "Indeed, you should," interjected Captain Howell. "This rabble of sea dogs are the most ill-disciplined I've ever had crewing one of my vessels. I believe this ship to be one of the king's finest. Does that finery not extend to those who man her?" asked Thomas. "Oh, many of them are fine men, but there's a fair share of blackguards too. We haven't been to port in England for over 2 years now, and we've had to make do replacing the crew with men from the local islands." Lady Thomas looked shocked. "Are we not safe, Captain Howell?" "Safe enough, my lady." Howell snapped his fingers at the serving boy, whispered something in his ear before he scurried out of the room to fetch more wine. "All the guards are good English stock, and we flog anyone caught stepping out of line." Mr. Wilkes, who had been mousily picking at his plate of food, made a little cough, then joined in the conversation. "I do not approve of the floggings, Captain Howell, as well you know. I don't think you should be so hard on any man who has simply taken an extra ration after they have worked so hard all day." Howell laughed heartily at Wilkes's suggestion, and Lord Thomas joined in. "You're too soft, Wilkes." Howell looked like he was going to say something else, but his attention went to the bottle of wine that the serving boy had just returned with. He grabbed it, pulled out the cork with his teeth, and filled his goblet before offering it to the others. Hemmingsworth noticed Lady Thomas looked rather alarmed at the conversation, or perhaps at the captain's drunken demeanour, and decided to steer the conversation elsewhere. "So, why did you board at Georgetown, Lord Thomas? You're not here on King's orders, are you?" Thomas swallowed the mouthful of chicken breast he'd been chewing on, dabbed his lips with a serviette, and smiled. "Heavens, no, Mr. Hemmingsworth." Lady Thomas looked down at her plate, avoiding eye contact, while Lord Thomas went on, "We're hunting for treasure." For a second time that evening, the dining cabin was filled with Captain Howell's laughter. Wilkes joined in nervously before quickly stopping, and Hemmingsworth just looked perplexed. "Treasure?" Hemmingsworth asked. "Good God, man, you can't be serious." Lord Thomas was not offended by the reaction. He was well aware of the incredulity he would face over his mission. "Indeed I am, sir. I've spent years researching the lost fortune of my grandfather. I'm getting close, thanks to the recent acquisition of a very old map of a remote island where he is said to have been travelling to before his disappearance. Him, his men, and all of his gold." Hemmingsworth wasn't sure how to respond. He had many questions, but he simply settled for, "Oh." An obviously inebriated Howell pushed his plate away from him, and after taking yet another large gulp of wine, banged his fist on the table. "If it's your family's fortune that you seek, who are any of us to cast aspersions on such an endeavour? I'll take you wherever you want," he said emphatically, before laughing again. "I expect you will, sir," Lady Thomas said abruptly. "My husband is paying you handsomely." Wilkes made another meek coughing sound, before speaking up with his familiar nervous tone. "I think perhaps some of us have had a little too much to drink, and maybe we should retire for the evening." "Indeed," said Hemmingsworth, relieved to get away from the inebriated captain who had taken to slapping him on the back every time he laughed. Lord Thomas looked at his wife. "Perhaps we should head to our cabin. We've got a long day ahead of us tomorrow." Lady Thomas smiled, and everyone got up and headed back to their own quarters, except for the captain. Howell poured himself another cup of wine. "Please yourselves," he said to no one in particular, and carried on drinking, while the serving boy gathered up all the dishes.